This is the Homeless Needs Assessment and Action Plan, and I believe Mr. Brown is going to be leading this conversation this morning.
Good morning, Chair Euler, members of the board. Jeff Brown, your Health and Human Services Director. Today I'm here with Dr. Robert Marbut, our contracted homeless consultant, who will be presenting to you his findings and recommendations regarding the homeless needs assessment that he recently completed within our county. As a very short bit of background, your board approved a contract with Dr. Marbut last September to conduct a homeless needs assessment and make recommendations to strengthen our homeless continuum of care. The needs assessment involved meeting with over 70 stakeholders, which included yourselves, included elected and appointed city officials and safety net providers. It also included a survey of street-level homeless individuals last November during an extreme weather event. The initial findings were shared with both the Homeless Advisory Group and the general public at a forum in Auburn last February that was very successful, was attended by over 150 individuals. So at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Marbut to provide his detailed findings and recommendations.
Thank you very much. And we've covered a lot of ground in the last 5 months. Here's a list of the activities that we've gone through. Met with many of the agencies and have met with all the agencies that directly are involved with homeless services. I've met with a lot of folks that are experienced homelessness. I've gone out with observation. We've gone out with 4 different law enforcement areas, jurisdictional areas, and all of that was covered or in the contract and what we thought would be happening. We added the second bullet from the bottom as a survey instrument because there were some definite sort of holes in the data that we needed to get into. So we were able to go through and add that survey in, but everything was covered in the contract and then some. As we go through this, as a quick refresher, because this is going to become an important throughout the presentation, is to understand there are different triggers of homelessness. Not every person experiencing homeless experiences from the same trigger. In terms of the male side, you have folks that have mental health issues, which would include the veterans in post-traumatic stress, acute stress issue, and as well as folks that with substance abuse, and sometimes that is self-medicating with mental health. I mean, they come so together, and sadly, a lot of the treatment history in the United States is to separate those, but in reality, they're very connected, and 90% of homeless individuals are experiencing one or the other or both, and generally are co-presenting on the male side. And then you also have job retention. A lot of folks will get jobs, it's the retaining the job. And so it's not resume building, it's not job application, it's job retention and life skills necessary to keep that. On the female side, you need to add in domestic violence and divorce triggered, and that's very unique on with the females in terms of the triggers. At first glance, when we got here, there was a lot of anecdotal information. There was a lot of, some of it was missed, some of it was turned out to be real, but we really wanted to get at the data, and so as we started going through, the one big observation, the overhang observation, is the agencies, there was no real system. Every agency was working as an independent silo. The next bit of information was the lack of information, the lack of data. A lot of anecdotes, and because of the lack of real solid data, a lot of the myths were becoming facts. A lot of decision-making was being made with the lack of concrete information. The few policies, and I'm using that policies in terms, were really tactical in nature and were being made by individuals. They weren't being made by the system or a collective or sort of a proactively thought out strategic effort. The other is there are at least 3 major populations of homeless that are very distinct: Roseville, Auburn, and East County, Northeastern County. Very distinct, very much tied to the local community, as we later found out, but also have very different unique needs. Not all was bad. Early on, we started finding some information that your family and children's were relative and things relative to U.S., relative to the state. You're doing very, very well with families and children. We didn't know how well initially. And the overall homeless number was dropping, even though the chronic number was increasing. And so those were our initial observations. And so we wanted to get at the data, and we looked at the point in time count that just has come out. Not all the data is out with this report. The 3 reds in here are important, or sorry, 4 reds and then the 1 blue. 3 of these were actually good news. The overall individual number was going down. The veterans number was going down, and the severe and mental health was going down. And I think mental health was going down tied with veterans because of a lot of veteran activity and veteran vouchers. And I think those 2 were probably interplaying in the drop. So all 3 of those were good news. Your family and children was sustaining at about what it was, so it was really minimal in terms of relative. I don't want to diminish. If you're that family that is stuck and having problems, that's tragic for you. But in terms of an aggregated number, how are you doing compared to the state of California? How are you doing compared to the country? Your family and children's side is real good. The one area was the chronic homeless, that 42%. That number is definitely going up and was going up. The rest of your numbers over the last 4 point in times, which happens every other year, were pretty consistent. The one maybe data that we did not see in point in time that we saw in the survey was you have a pretty, in terms of age, your average age of your homeless, your median age of your homeless is 50 years old now, and that's on the higher end of a national number. As we looked at our research, again, I'm a real data guy. I want data to drive it. Not all the data was available. The point in time data had gaps in it. HMIS has a lot of gaps in it. So we went out and did a survey back in December and January that we were really targeting the chronic street homeless. So it's a subset. If you think of chronic homeless, the HUD definition is somebody who's experienced homelessness in 4 different shelters in a 3-year period, or has continuously been homeless for a year, or has a mental health or physical qualifying disability to that. It's a pretty high threshold, but there is a threshold. So the best way to think of that is somebody is 1 year or more homeless. That's probably the best sort of bar. And then we went and looked at street level homelessness, which is a subset of that, often generally more chronic of the overall number. So we came up with 6 research questions that we needed to really get at in order to develop some policy. Is your problem homegrown, or is it from elsewhere? That obviously is an initial threshold, because that will totally change. Do you have a lot of inbound people or a lot of people that are from here? The rail yard initially had a lot of conversation where everybody we met with the first 60 days was saying the rail yard is a big part of this, so we needed to find out if that was true or not. The chronic number had 2 different features. How big was it, high or low? And then is it increasing or decreasing within both the point of time data and with our survey? Then how mobile is the population within the county? Because that would really lead to different types of solutions. And would a one-site solution work? So going at those questions, and some of you saw the earlier report with a lot of data. I've put each of these questions on one slide, both in terms of speed and clarity. That is, you'll see anywhere, depending on how you measure it, from 34% to 82% is really homegrown. I mean, you're compared to around the country, you do not get a lot of folks from out of town, and that may be weather driven, and it may be an artifact of the winter time. That people are here. If you choose to be homeless, you might go to San Diego, you might go to Santa Barbara, you might go to Phoenix. There are a lot of other places that candidly have a lot better weather especially in the wintertime. And so the folks that are remaining here are very much tied to here. 34% went to high school here. And what was interesting in the surveys is we had about 10 people not only wrote their high school they went to, but like their mascot of the high school. I mean, it very much tied to the community. 50% had family here, 55% became homeless here, and 68% had lived here longer than 5 years. That, to me, is a really powerful number. And then 82%, which is really the most important number, did you become homeless while you were here, or were you homeless and came in? And so this very much shows this is a homegrown problem. This was the rail yard question. All of you have seen this before. 95%, and again, this is the chronic homeless. This is the street, this is the toughest group. Did not come in by the rail. About 5% did come in by the rail. This number is, this one I'm going to point at because this is really the most important slide there is. This is the national number and point in time of chronic, 14.5% just for this last year. So we're comparing apples to apples. Placer was 42%, almost 42% here. The California number, which is in the report, but we didn't put in the slide because it's getting too busy, is about double that. And then when you look at the chronic homeless, the street homeless, that was initially we were engaged because that was the real challenging area, 66% met the HUD chronic definition. So to oversimplify this, your numbers are twice the number of chronic of California, almost 3 times the number for the United States, comparing apples to apples to apples. I mean, it's same year, same exact question, same exact survey methodology. Then when you add in the survey that Sean and I did, it gets to 66% in terms of that the group that is so challenging. So the numbers relative to California, relative to United States, or relative to your street population are just way, way, way off the charts. And then when we started to say, well, maybe that's an artifact of the percent because your overall number is coming down, so that might have artificially created a data artifact that went up. So we wanted to look at the actual raw number of individuals that meet the chronic definition, and it too is going up significantly here. So something is going on that individuals are from your community are actually becoming more chronic as the years are going by and such. So that's was a really important data information to understand. Here's the intra-mobility, very low mobility. Part of that is probably an artifact of the transportation system. Part of that is just simple geography. But the other is the real affinity to local areas. People in Roseville identify with Roseville. Individuals in Auburn or Northeast County identified with their area and more or less lined up with their high schools. There wasn't a big enough data set that we could go in and do a sort of a secondary or tertiary analysis. The trend line looked there, but we couldn't get statistical because the N was not big enough. The multi-site, here's where people are living, your primary resident at night of where you slept the night before we surveyed you. If you add East County and stack it with Auburn, it gets to be about 50-50 when you compare it to Roseville. Now, going in beyond data, this was the qualitative side that we were asked to also research. Our initial hunch that we saw in the first few weeks here, the more we did our interviews, the more we looked, agencies really were siloed. There is not a system. This is the most important thing you need to do to fix is you got to get to a systems approach rather than a bunch of individual agencies operating in a silo. Again, not integrated, not coordinated. Again, this is part of the problem that is being caused. The quality of data just the more we dug in, the more questions we had, that just simply the data wasn't there. That's why we had to go do the survey. The unvalidated miss, this was, again, a big frustration, but I think as we got about into month 3, people were starting to learn about the data, and that was already starting, that almost organically through our research project, people started to look at their own data, looked at the other data, and I think the cool thing is a lot of people sort of, as we were going through this process, on their own started to say, you know, that's a myth, this is reality, that's a myth, and so people were starting to put, rather than it going off of hunches, we're using data to make those assumptions. There's no 24/7 facility, pure, traditional, where you go in, you stay at the same place all day long, you get treatment during the day, you get food there, you sleep at night. There's no place like that for the emergency level. Auburn lacks an emergency portal. You know, we've talked a lot about that before. Roseville's operational model has some real serious issues, and I'll go through that in a little bit. The big takeaway here that was striking, if you look at the individuals that are living in Roseville, going through the gathering in, are 17.1% more chronic than all the other homeless taken together in the county in terms of time. In other words, they are 17% longer on the street currently in terms of the homeless condition. If anything, they should be lower. So that means the treatment program working there, the model is actually not only not working, it actually is increasing the length of time a person is homeless. There's a lack of transitional services and affordable housing. If you fix the entire emergency system and you don't have that intermediate, the longer term answer, you'll get clogged. So you got to be careful not to put all your eggs in. You got to fix the whole system, not just one side of the system. Again, the upside is your family and children. You're doing very well. That's one of the areas that is an absolute success. Looking at national numbers, state numbers, looking at counties around you, your family and children is very well run, has very good outcomes. Again, if you're on that 3 or 4 or 5 families that are on a wait list or on a bubble, that's absolute crisis for you, but in terms of aggregated numbers, you are doing very, very well. You're doing very, very well in your overall homeless numbers, and you're doing very well in your veterans numbers. So there's a lot of good news in this. It's not all bad. The bad is just that very unique cut of your street level homeless. So going into the recommendations, the first one is, again, data. Your homeless management information system is not being used. It's being used simply to meet just enough to meet the federal contracts. And if you're an agency that doesn't get federal money or not really involved and not using it, the data is not real time, meaning inputted within a 24-hour cycle. It's not universal. People are not sharing data between agencies. This is one of the things the federal government is doing very, very well. They're actually trying to get out of the point in time count and trying to get everybody in the homeless management information system. And I think we're going to be talking in May a lot about this. But this, you need a data system for 2 reasons. One is you all as policymakers need to go to a report or a dashboard and every week or every month see how we're doing. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And the fact that we had to go do a survey to fill in gaps shows you don't have the data for strategic decision making. So that's one part. But the other is you don't have the homeless management information system to actually help the individuals at a tactical level. And so we need it both for strategy and tactics. We need better decision making, see how we're doing, but we also, that is critical in terms of the case management of the individual, to understand what services the persons are getting, to have warm handoffs between the different agencies and such. And so it really is both a tactical tool and a strategic tool. So recommendation 1 is about the software package itself. There's some improvements that are needed that are both in terms of reporting out. You need to create a universal release so all the agencies share in the data. And if anybody is getting money of any kind, whether city money, county money, the feds already require it, foundation money, I strongly encourage that everybody be involved in the same system. A lot of the agencies I went to have their own data, and it's on hand cards or on a sheet or an Excel sheet, and so nobody's talking to each other. So the very first stage of integration is integrating data, and that will help you all as strategists, but it will also help the individuals that are being helped. And so that's recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 is the Roseville operation model. The Gathering Inn is a great agency. They have a great brand. They have buy-in with the churches and the faith-based community. They have a good history. The street homeless in particular really likes them. So I'm by no means saying to get rid of the Gathering Inn by any means. I'm just saying a model got started 25, 30 years ago and has not been updated. We do not know of another place that rotates people on a 24-hour basis in a national best practice. The shortest one we know of is Family Promise that rotates. It's almost the exact model as a Gathering Inn, but they rotate on a weekly basis rather than a daily basis. And if you can move from a daily to a weekly, that will increase your stability by 700%. It does not change the burden of the churches, because over a same 12-week period or 6-month period, the churches, we get the same amount of time. So it just, rather than every night there's the shuffling, it would happen over a week period. And I really encourage the faith-based community to look at somebody like Family Promise, who has great outcomes and does it on a 7-week or a 7-day schedule rather than a daily. The daily schedule is so disruptive because at a time when a person needs stability, and I think this is why the chronic numbers are so much higher in Roseville than anywhere else, because the system itself is actually inputting instability when at a time you need stability. So that's number 1. Number 2 is during a given day, if you follow a homeless person, they start to move back to the Gathering Inn about an hour and a half before the line, because they don't want to lose their place in line. They don't want to lose their place because they're not guaranteed. So there's a whole activity of movement of an individual that, rather than pursuing treatment during the day or being in job, it's all about making sure they don't lose their place that night. So they come in, they start moving back to the Gathering Inn, they take public transportation, start walking, they get in line at the Gathering Inn, then that will take 30 or 40 minutes sometimes. Later in the month, the lines are bigger. Earlier in the month, they're not. But then they go through that line, then they stay in that line, then they get processed, and then at that point, then they wait for transportation, and then sometimes a transportation bus loop, it may be 35 minutes, depending on where you're going in church, all that just to get your place at night. So the individuals at the Gathering Inn, rather than pursuing transformational services of treatment, are pursuing food and pursuing getting their mat that night. And that process takes it upwards to 4 to 5 hours on the high end. On the shorter time at the beginning of the month, it may only take 3.5 hours. But that's the time when a person should be having a job or should be in a treatment service. Instead, it's all about the mechanics of going through. The third is not 24/7, which we talked about. And 24/7 means you're in a program throughout the whole cycle of the day, and you're not off campus, you're not moving around, you're not pursuing food elsewhere. And then the fourth issue there is the commingling of children with chronic men and women. There's nobody in the country that says that's a good practice anymore. That was done 20 years ago for cost-effective reasons, but you should never have families with children at a chronic facility ever. That just creates many, many problems and concerns. The third one, which we've talked a lot about, I won't spend too much time on, is I think the barracks is a good interim solution. It is not the ideal solution. It's not even a perfect solution, but it's if you will, a good start. It would do a lot of good things. I do have concerns about the barracks building. I have concerns that the building is old. I have concerns that it doesn't have a commercial kitchen. It doesn't have the ability to expand. It doesn't have the meeting rooms. But with the options out there, I think it's your best way to start, and then just get started, use it, and then over time try to find something that is a better placement over time. My report goes through a lot of outline about what a facility should look like. There's a lot of detail in the report. The report also goes into the idea of sharing the cost. I really believe this should not be a burden of just the county. It needs to, everybody needs to help. Faith-based community, cities, the county, the business community, because you want a sustainable process that is open. And as you open this up, you have to close down other things. You know, I have one whole rec about feeding. Henry's Lawn needs to be closed down. You can't, if you want to get people into treatment, that's how recovery occurs, not on a jail cell floor or not out in a park. You need to be inside of a full-time program getting treatment. In my report, I go in a section about what I call look, feel, and smell. You want the facility to look good, you want it to feel nurturing, and you want it to smell, I mean, you know, nicely, you know. And you candidly go in a lot of places, and they don't look good, they look cluttered, they don't feel nurturing, they feel institutionalized, and they don't smell good. If you improve the quality, that's the dignifying the individuals we're trying to help. It also improves volunteer commitment. It actually raises more funds because people are more proud of it, and it has candidly better outcomes. And finally, the local community, you're a better neighbor. If your facility looks good, run well, smells nice, it improves the local neighborhood likes it more. Fourth rec, this is I struggled with this a bit because I don't know who should own this problem, the chronic problem. Because everything, if you look at vets are going well, family and children are going well, but there needs to be something at a geographical level that takes all the agencies, the cities, the county, the different agencies, right-hand Auburn now, assuming that moves forward, the gathering in, the continuing care. And so what I suggest is that this get put inside the continuum care, in essence, create a work group inside the continuum care that focuses on chronic homeless. There needs to be a group that owns this problem, that on a regular cycle works on this, looks at that data every single month and says, did we get better this month? Did we get worse? That vets the program, that coordinates between right-hand Auburn and the gathering in, and coordinates the activity. Because if somebody doesn't own this problem or own this challenge, it's just going to continue to sort of move around. I don't think you want to increase the bureaucracy. I don't think it should be a governmental agency. And the continuum care is already designed to do that at the federal level. So I think if you put it inside the continuum care, I think is where that would be a good place to put the work group, get all the stakeholders at a table, start giving them their data, and start vetting out programs. As part of this, the street feeding needs to realign with the gathering in, and street services need to align with the right-hand Auburn. If you feed in a park, you're pursuing food and you're not pursuing treatment. I'm not saying don't feed. I'm saying put the feeding programs and align them with the agencies. If you're going to be overnight at a church, that's where the feeding program should be at. If you're going to go to the barracks, that's where the feeding program should be at. They should not be in parking lots. They should not be back of churches, because what that does is move people off the treatment path and get people into the chasing the feeding rather than pursuing treatment programs. So you really need to take these feeding programs and align it with, the Auburn Safe Harbor, align it with the gathering in. The cool thing is that also improves the cost effectiveness of those programs by allowing food to be served there. It lowers the operating costs of those facilities. Longer term, you need some housing placements, and this comes in a lot of varieties. This comes in housing first, this comes in tiny houses, this comes in low-income tax credits. It comes in a thing Sean and I have been helping a few communities on that is showing some success, where one church faith community, a congregation, a synagogue, a mosque, actually will adopt a homeless person for a year and commit to helping their treatment recovery program and work within the system and provide the resources for that individual. So this comes in a lot of different ways. There's no silver bullet. Housing First, it works with certain communities. In particular, it works with families with children. It works with males who have had jobs. So that works. It doesn't work as well with other subgroups. Housing First is a very expensive model in communities that have high occupancy rates. You have high occupancy rates. Southern California does. Florida beach areas do. Texas beach areas do. If you are in Kansas that might have an 80% occupancy rate where you have 20% inventory, that's very cost effective to do Housing First there. But you have a very high occupancy rate, so that means you almost have to create your inventory, which is very, very expensive to do. So there's really no silver bullet here. You need to try everything, and I think probably the best solutions is a little of everything. And you want to try it because you do need to fix that, because if you get your emergency program really working well, but your back end, it will clog your front end. And so you need to start to create some inventory here. I think one of the best federal programs there are is the Low-Income Tax House Credit Program. It's a very, very good program. I don't know, that's a competitive bid on a regional basis. So you may have the greatest program locally, but then you lose out to somebody 3 counties away at the last minute. So that's the downside of that. But we need to create that capacity. Number 7 is that if you had to summarize this, we need to go from a service model to a graduation model. If our goal is simply to serve homeless and to bring things to homeless and to get food to homeless and to get clothing to homeless, that's a service model. That can become a very enabling model versus an engaging model that says our expectation is we want to increase graduation rates. Will you help everybody? No, I'm not naive to think that. But if you change your strategies and change your cultural dynamic, much like Peter Drucker talked about in his books, you really will start to make some change. And if you move from agency-centric, which you're very agency-centric now, you're a bunch of silos, and move it into system, you'll have a very different change. If you move from the output to outcome, so instead of how many meals you fed to how many people you graduate, and then move from an engaging, from an enabling to an engaging, you can make a really big, big difference in the culture. And 8, this is a pretty simple one. This is the staffing side to recommendation number 1. Recommendation 1 is the software. Recommendation 8 is the staffing and system. This is the people it takes that you need to have to do that. So with that, go to Q&A, or if I missed anything.
Okay, board members, any questions or comments before we take comments from the audience? Supervisor Holmes?
Yeah, I have a question about the overall rate of homelessness is going down in Placer County.
Absolutely.
But the chronic rate, the percentage is increasing.
Correct.
So if the overall rate keeps going down, isn't the chronic rate going to increase anyhow?
That's true, and that's why when we went back to this, and I'll show you this data, because that's what we were wondering, is that an artifact of, we were very concerned about that question, and that's why we took this slide. This is the real this is not a percent slide, this is the real number of people. It's sort of hard to read the data, but if you go back to 4 point in times ago, there were 102 people who qualified as chronic. Now the real number is 212 people. So you have both an percent going up, but you also have a real number going up, if that makes sense. That's why this slide was so important.
So can you explain to me how the Gathering Inn contributes to the chronic homelessness? Because I know the Gathering Inn provides housing, has gotten a lot of people in housing since they've been in existence. So how are they promoting chronic homelessness if they're putting people back in housing?
And I think it would come from, and I was careful to say, I'm not saying they do, I'm saying the data infers that it does.
Right.
And so, you know, the causality is always a challenge. But the fact that if you look at the people who are staying at the Gathering Inn versus everybody else, they're 17% longer on the street than everybody else. And everybody else is, for the most part, not getting any treatment at all. And the Roseville model is getting treatment, but the treatment appears to be counterproductive. And I think it would simply be the instability. Because you need stability, and the model in Roseville is not a stable model.
So how is it increasing the instability? I mean, I know there are programs that the Gathering Inn gives. Is it a fault of what the Gathering Inn is doing, or is it a fault of the people in the programs that don't do the work?
There are probably two factors going on. If you actually stay there the day and look at the people who sleep, the say 75 a night, very few people are involved in any daytime programming there. It's a very small, and I've watched it several days there, both people coming and going on the outside and on the inside. So to think people are availing themselves to the program during the day, very few people are, as a percent. But the other part is you only get one, it's about meals, so people are moving during the day to go get a meal. If the Gathering Inn had all 21 meals at their place and stayed at the same place for 7 days, I think you would see dramatic improvements, because that's exactly what the Family Promise model, the Family Promise model and the Gathering Inn are virtually the exact model, except for they move once a week, Gathering Inn moves every day. And this moving every day is very inefficient, because about 5 hours of the productive day is wasted in the move process. So there are a lot of ways you can improve that. One would be to tell somebody, you have a guaranteed slot here tonight. You know, there's some cheap ways to fix this. So instead of having people queue up and get in line or there, another would be to say, we're going to meet at 6 o'clock, here's the bus, you have a guaranteed place tonight, and we'll take you to the next place. So that way you can use the whole productive day. That would be, that's a quick change. But the best change would happen is to have people stay at that church for all 7 days and move on the weekend like Family Promise does. You need to increase stability in programming. And part of that is self-selection out. Part of that is the instability of the process.
So I know the Gathering Inn has monthly meetings with all the churches, and I've attended those, and they all are very enthusiastic about the role they play in the Gathering Inn. Did you attend any of those meetings, and did you talk to them about the weekly program?
I've actually asked to speak to that group, and I've asked to speak. I guess that's the way to put it.
All right, well, that would be something.
Yeah, and I would love to do that,
But
to
I
talk
know
straight with the churches.
some of the churches that are helping and doing a very good job with the Gathering Inn are having problems keeping their attendance up.
Right.
And I think that might be a hindrance. Someone might not look at that favorably, to give their church space up for a week when they're trying to rebuild their attendancy. And so that's one of the.
No, and I don't want to take away from the serious challenge of the mechanics to get to there. I'm just saying, if you really want to address this problem, you have to figure out a way to get there.
So in the long run, is the Gathering Inn helping reduce the homeless rate in Placer County?
I don't think it is. I don't think the data shows it is. I think it is serving a group of people, but it's not reducing the number, and it's not reducing the length of time of homelessness.
But they've helped people get into homes, and if you ask those people, I think.
No, and there's absolutely a lot of people the Gathering Inn has helped. I'm not taking that away. I'm talking relative to a national best practice, relative to Salvation Army, relative to a union rescue mission. I'm using relative terms. Right. You know, it's sort of like we would give our children grades, you know, when you go take math. Is a C- better than an F? Yes, but is an A better than a C?
What is the national best practice?
In terms of that,
yeah.
It is by far stability, is to enter an emergency system and then move to a stable, a long-term stable.
So is that kind of a generic system? I mean, it's one size fits all, or?
No. You got to customize. You got to customize it. But Father Joe, who's down in San Diego, who really started this all, and he's still alive, he would argue that if you've been a chronic homeless person, you need stability for 9 months. He goes way out, but he gets an 83% success rate, and they never come back. That these individuals graduate from the street and you never see them again. But he invests 9 months into a person before they move into the long-term housing, and he has an incredible success rate, and people don't move. They're in one place for 9 months on an average. Now, some faster, some shorter, but the moving a person every day is very it's destabilizing at the time when you need stability. That's the core of the problem.
So Placer County has a relatively low amount of homeless people.
Overall, absolutely.
Overall. And if we do that type of project, the Father Joe's project, it would be very expensive for a relatively a small amount of people,
Right.
right? So
It'd be very expensive.
So that would be part of our problem.
Well, that's why I'm not recommending that model. That's why I think if you take the gathering in as it is and move to moving people once a week rather than once a day, because in a 6-month period, the church would have the same amount of activity. It would just be intense. And I think the reason why I've asked to go speak to that group is I'd love to make the case for look at the data, look at the research, look at other places, bring in maybe somebody from Family Promise, show how it works, and say you do the same thing. So if you could figure it out, if there's any way you can help us do this, it will improve the success rate. Because I think in the end, most churches want to improve the success rate. Mm-hmm. And so if they hear the data and understand, they go, God, that's going to be tough for us, but we're going to do it. Or worst case, give it a try for 6 months and see what happens.
And you may lose some churches along the way.
Yeah, and you may. The flip side is you may lose a little churches, and maybe some that can't do that. Maybe you ask them to step up on the feeding, step on something else, and do a rotation another way. Help the process. Because in the end, if we're really trying to reduce that chronic, there's something going on in this county that actually, once you become homeless, you have a higher chance of becoming chronic here than the national number by 3 times. Something's going on here.
Well, some of the homeless people may be crazy, but they're not stupid. They understand where to get services.
Right.
And having been on my business right there where I saw a lot of homeless people, they had a routine to survive. So
Right.
I've observed that. So, okay, thank you for your.
Supervisor Montgomery.
Thank you, Dr. Marbut. As always, it's very enlightening to see your presentation. I actually see, I understand Supervisor Holmes' concerns. I actually see the gathering in as an incredible opportunity for us. You used the phrase self-selecting, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, and I've said, anyone who is willing to spend that much time trying to find some place to stay for one night is prime territory for us to provide a higher level of services for a longer time frame. And so I think that the opportunity is really with the model like the gathering in, but doing exactly as you say and extending that period of time. I mean, there's, between, I think you said 65 and 85 people who use that facility on any given night, depending on the time of the month. To me, that's 65 or 85 people who are saying, I would like some assistance, because they are putting so much time to that single night. And I see Susie nodding her head back there. And I just want to say, anything that I can personally do to help in those conversations with the churches or other groups, it doesn't have to be churches, to say, how do we get to that 7-night model? I think Susie'd probably be totally on board with that as well. I haven't talked to Susie about it, but her goal, her hope, her outcome that she's striving for is to get people out of homelessness and to get them services. And I just think there's an incredible opportunity here that our board and our community shouldn't miss. And again, it's back to that question of self-selection. These are folks who are saying, I want to stay somewhere. Now, I'm sure they would rather want to stay somewhere 7 nights in a row than 1 night in a row. And this is an opportunity for us to do that. Different question. The HMIS program, I know that's a computer program that's available through, I believe, the federal government. How much is it to purchase that? So what would it cost, for example, to provide every one of our service providers with that so that we are all interconnected in a real-time database.
And this is one of the good and bad of the federal government. It is an unfunded mandate. The federal government says you have to have this, but they don't. They used to give you some funding, but they're phasing that funding down. And so there's about 8 or 9 vendors around the country. And if you go deeper in my rec, I didn't want to bore you with the trivia, but I think there needs to be quick review. You got Bolin now. I think you need to check to see if how cost effective it would be to make the changes with them. If they don't give you a good price, then go look at some other vendors, because there are a lot of vendors that do it. Because you just need some tweaks. You need some report tweaks. You need some input. You need some customization on it. But the thing we've used in other cities that are pretty effective is we try to find a funding pool where every agency gets one license for free, and that way there's no reason not to input. But that means you got to go find that money to do that.
But when you say every agency, my understanding of the HMIS program is the Gathering Inn and the Seventh-day Adventist Church and everybody else who's part of the larger solution needs to have this same program.
Absolutely.
And needs to be able to tie into it. So that's dozens of agencies and entities in Placer County. And you know, part of our job is to figure out how we fund things.
Right.
How do we pay for services that people need? And so I'm very interested in how we get to funding that. And the federal government not giving us any help is not a surprise. Right. But generally, I'm someone who's providing services. How much is it going to cost me to buy an HMS program?
Your number is higher here than in most places, but because you have less agencies involved. And so I'd hate to give you a number, you know, and not, because I think the number will go lower if you make some improvements first, and then that per number. In most communities around the country, we're able to get the license to somewhere between $200 and $700 a year, to give you an idea.
And that's for each entity that uses
Yeah,
it.
but it's one license per there. The way these systems work, if you have 2 at an agency, it's 2 times 700. But I think you need to get, and that's just the way their business model is. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with it. But I think each agency needs to have at least one free license. And that way there's no excuse of not participating.
Okay, and I'm trying to understand what you mean by agencies. So does the Gathering Inn need to go buy their own license?
That's the way the model works, is that's part of, and the Fed government says if you want a federal contract, you have to buy a license. But what happens is, for example, the food banks, food pantries are not tied into the HMIS system here, but they very much are very interconnected to the homeless community here. That data is not, what would Jesus do, is not connected to that system. The feeding program that goes on up the street in the parking lot is not in they all have their own data system. None of that is getting put into the system.
Right, and that's exactly what I'm getting at, which is each of these, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily an impediment that we can't get beyond, but we need to understand as, you know, potentially a funding mechanism for these, right, that we're looking at $700 for every entity, whether it's a food bank or the Gathering Inn or the Seventh-day Adventist Church, in order to tie all that data and those services
Absolutely.
together. Okay, so that's really what I'm trying to get at. On another data and economic-based question, and again, this is going to be a tough question because this is not your area, but we've talked about having to open some sort of 24/7 center, whether in Auburn or in Roseville or both. Any idea roughly what those sorts of costs are to set something up and then operate it that would serve the needs that you've identified?
If you can get to an economies of scale, the sort of national number is $15 to $30 a day per person per night. Once you get to an economy of scale, and different buildings have different economies, so it's really hard to say that building is 50 and that building's 100, but you should be in that, somewhere in that range, $15 to $30 a day.
And that's for operational costs. That's exclusive of infrastructure.
Yeah, that's it. That would include soft infrastructure, you know, like utility, but not any physical improvements
Okay.
and such. But that would include staffing, security, food, case management, et cetera.
And our point-in-time count, I think it was slide 11, showed 541, I think that we counted this year. It was,
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it.
there we go, 540 individuals. So that would be, say we could house them all, that would be 15 minimum per night times 540 for operational costs.
And that number is your higher number. That includes your family and children in there. That includes some people already in existing programs like Salvation Army. That includes vet. So that number would be significantly lower. I think if you were to look more to your universe, would be back to your question with the 214. I think on that slide, that's sort of your chronic, unsheltered number. So I think that's a better number that would be your highest end number.
Okay.
Would be that whatever your unsheltered chronic number.
Okay, and I ask not to, put you on the spot here in terms of coming up with specific dollars to Placer County, because that's very difficult to do. I ask because we have another agenda item that's going to be coming forward that's, frankly, talking about economics largely. And we as a board have to prioritize what do we put taxpayer dollars to. And so something, and maybe this is for Jeff, something that I'm going to want some assistance with moving forward, if this board says let's move forward on something, is a better understanding of what those costs would really be. For infrastructure, if we did say, okay, we're going to fund something, or maybe we're going to partner with somebody to fund something, what would those costs be? Because we have this budget that we have to balance every year, and we have to provide elections and roads and libraries and other things like that.
So let me just offer an estimate. If we took the higher number at $30 a day for 200 individuals, that's about $6,000 a day. So on a monthly basis, $180,000. If you did that 12 months a year, you could see you're over $2 million.
And again, that's exclusive of infrastructure. Does that include employee costs, benefits, retirement, or is that just operational to provide services to them?
That'd be a fully loaded cost.
Fully loaded?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and we're just running 2.3 million if you were to take the high number and the 2.4, if everybody agreed to go into the program, and I'm not, there's always a 70% of that. So that'd be your upper marker.
Okay, great, that's very helpful for my understanding, thank you.
Supervisor Duran.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your information. My thought here is that, we've done some things in the past, and I know what you're saying about the gathering in. I know Susie doesn't take that, any offense to that. I hope not. I think she does some wonderful things. I think she does some wonderful things, but I think what I'm getting out of this is that if we continue to do the same things that we're doing, it's kind of like the definition of insanity, but we've got to tweak the model. That's all we've got to do. The question is, how do we do that? And I think that you've kind of laid out the process of some of the things that we need to start doing in order to get to those particular outcomes. And it's the definition of what works for us. I think that's the most important thing, the most important goal that we have. It's obvious from what you've said that what we've done for children and families seems to be working. So it seems to me that if we're going to address this other issue with regards to the chronic folks, that we have to put in place and tweak the system in order to assist in furthering that outcome and align it with the same outcome that we are for families. Now, trying to say that that we're doing well or that the numbers are going to go, or that doesn't really do anything to address the problem, does it?
Nope.
Okay. I would agree with you. I have my concerns about the barracks as well. But I would also agree that that is a decent start, and that's someplace that we need to start. And I do appreciate the fact that you have mentioned that this isn't just a county problem. We've got a lot of jurisdictions here, a lot of people, a lot of moving parts. Most folks in those jurisdictions have a tendency to focus on economic development, which isn't a bad thing. But at the same time, if we don't get a handle on this issue now, it's just going to get worse as we grow economically and in greater stature throughout the next 50 years. So I appreciate the information that you have, and I think that it's come at an opportune time to be able to do some further work on this issue. So.
And to address your two front end, I went back to the slide here. This is not my data here. This is your point. This is from your community data point in time. And if you look at what's happened from 11 to 13 to 15, is over doubled your chronic homeless, regardless of the overall number. This is the number of people. And I don't think there's any reason to think that slide, if you keep doing exactly what you're gonna do, I think we can come back two years from now and that number's gonna be about 250 to 260. That's what the growth, that's what this curve, this is what the raw data, not my data, your data, is showing. And that's why I think this is the most important slide in the whole presentation, because if you don't make a change, and I also would reiterate, the Gathering In is a great organization. They should be the organization. They got the credibility, they got the institutional, they got the church connectivity. But I think we all have to understand, if you want an improvement, something has to change, and that curve is not that curve is going straight up now, and that's why we got to make some changes.
And that's really the question here is, do we want an improvement? I would like to see it improve, but that's up to the rest of the board. Some people may not want it.
Right.
Supervisor Wygant.
Yeah, thanks for all the work. Appreciate it. I particularly am drawn to the broad strategic approach, and devil always ends up being in the details and the tactics. But you know, as we go forward, I'd like County Exec's office and Jeff, your shop, to bring back recommendations that focus on the total. And then focusing on this particular curve that is showing right now the chronic issue, I think the way for us to look at it in terms of cost, knowing that we do have broad budgetary responsibilities, and we're going to be hearing another one shortly. For me, I think the question really should focus on projecting our costs out maybe another 5 years as compared to what they are now, with changes and without changes. If we have exactly the same behavior and same strategy in place, or in other words, we do nothing, and you can assume that curve's going to look similar or not, I guess, and we could debate that forever. But if it does look the same as compared to making changes, and what expectations should we have for those changes, how much of a reduction can we achieve in the chronic homeless number, then that's going to also obviously be a huge cost driver. So we're going to have essentially the cost of changing our plan and putting in place an implementation package. But of course, the outcome should be both cost effective and strategic as it relates to the social benefits of accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish. So those are my comments at this point.
Thank you. So, as somebody who is very reticent to use kind of societal buzzwords, I will use two of them, and that is enabling versus empowering. And our system today, by virtue of seeing the growth in the chronic number while a decline overall in the total population, means that there is a population that we have figured out how to enable to survive within homelessness, as opposed to empowering them to grow out of homelessness. And that's the shift that you're looking at, is how do we take the existing infrastructure and shift it to one that grows, that stops enabling and starts empowering.
You've said it way better than I did.
So that being the case, when we identify a universe of call it 200 to 300, you said when we talk about these various management systems, that there are 8 of them that are federally recognized homeless management information systems. Yet, as a businessman, I can go out today and choose from between 3, 4, 5 dozen customer relationship management software systems that are cloud-based, that allow for multiple data points of entry from multiple users around the world on any given customer that I might be tracking. And I can do that today. I can go Salesforce. I can modify Salesforce in virtually any way I want to track a customer. If we start treating these people as customers along those lines and identify their various points of access to service through each of these, how does that not get us more toward this? Because what I'm focused on, and anybody that attended any of the hearings where we're talking about the DeWitt Center, I want to provide opportunity, but attendant with that is accountability. And so while, yes, we want to provide a consistency of service with repetition of location and those expectations being set, by the same token, I want the accountability associated with the kinds of programs that will actually get people out of homelessness. And so is there any prohibition against the county utilizing an existing off-the-shelf CRM system that I as a businessman could go out and buy, and that is customizable, that allows me to essentially assign a customer number? And anytime one of these people shows up at one of these service centers, the service provider says that Bill Jones, customer number 123, showed up today, and this was the service that was provided to him, and so we can track the services that they're getting. At the same time, we then have the ability to hold them accountable for checking in on those rehabilitative services that we're trying to provide.
You got several questions in there, so I'll go right to the software one. I wish what you were describing was that simple, but the Fed's requirements for any of the agencies to get federal money, they have to use one of the programs that's in essence authorized by them or approved by them.
And yet you're saying that we're no longer receiving reimbursement for those systems.
It's an unfunded mandate.
So we can waive off that requirement, and what's it cost us?
Yeah. Well, if you get in trouble with HUD in terms of their reporting software, you put at risk the federal funds for the services those agencies have. So that's the risk you have.
Kind of like the way that they enforced drinking ages across all states federally was by withholding federal highway funds.
The 80% match on federal highway. It's same way. I wish it was that simple, but now what you described is that internal accountability is what a case manager is supposed to do and be able to see every touch in the system. And I'll give an extreme case. I'll give two extreme cases. Somebody who totally falls through the gap, who we're seeing throughout the system clearly has a mental health issue, but we're seeing no contact with the mental health. Mm-hmm. That's a gap. Likewise, you have the accountability built in if they're getting a bag of food from 3 or 4 of the different pantries, and you look in, well, how many bags of food do you have? That's right. So it provides accountability on both sides of the system, because if the goal is really to get people help, we know how to get people help. Will everybody get off the street? No. Can we get large numbers off the street? Yes. Throughout the country, there are many programs who get 50% off the street, but you're in a 24/7 program. You're not moving around, you're not bouncing around, you're not going here for food and here. You're in one physical location, and the whole day is programmed. Everything about that day is programmed, and it's customized to you, and every data, every piece of information through the day as you hit the contact of the system goes into that computer software. Those are the programs that are very successful. St. Louis, Dallas, there are a lot of programs, Miami, that are just knocking it off the charts with it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, if there are no other comments by board members at this point, we will go ahead and open it up to public comment. So invite you to go ahead and step forward. Please identify yourself. Please try to keep comments limited to 3 minutes, but for certain folks such as providers of current services, we will certainly make allowance on that time to accommodate a more robust discussion.
Good morning. Surprised to see me, I'm sure. Susie DeFawcett, Executive Director of the Gathering Inn. So, lots of things are being batted around and talked about, and it's great that we're actually having this conversation. I think it's wonderful. We at PCOH have been talking for years, and it's good to be up here. So is this a white horse with black stripes, or is this a black horse with white stripes? What I want to talk to you about is the whole zebra. Yes, our shelter uses 48 churches in the South Placer community, 15 other service clubs, smaller churches, and volunteer groups to provide shelter and food on a nightly basis. The research I've read never defines where a person is sheltered as an indicator of their ability to move out of homelessness. If this were the case, all the people sleeping at the DeWitt Center in the middle of the plethora of county services available would not be homeless now. The Gathering Inn provides 25 of the 33 best practices services that are listed in Dr. Marbut's report, including a free substance abuse treatment program and 5 more that aren't on the list. We engaged 4 case managers who last year worked with over 346 people to move them forward and out of homeless. Unfortunately, we were not able to move all of them out of homelessness. Between our shelter that's open up at 3:30 in the afternoon to 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 days a week, and our resource center that's open Monday through Friday from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we provide services for 90% of the week going on. If we had the funding, yes, we could be open on the weekends and have our resource on the weekends, but unfortunately, we do not have that funding. During the day, the guests use these hours to meet with the case managers, attend to their treatment program, and attend mandatory life skills, which guarantees them a spot in the shelter. Of the 509 persons that we served in the 13-14 year, 231 people who used our shelter reported being first-time homeless ever. 125 met HUD's definition of chronically homeless. These statistics are different than what's being reported to you. We have been compiling statistics for the last 10 years, which you have in front of you. We've been using HMIS for the last 3 years at $2,500 a year, Jennifer. That's what it costs to buy a license, and then we pay for the staff to do the input. We use our statistical collection to ensure that we're providing the needed services to address the root causes of our guests' homelessness. We're the first step on the ladder out of homelessness. We're the waiting room for those that are waiting to move into county programs, other programs, or the domestic shelter. Families with children who are living on the streets are given a safe harbor, free of persons under the influence or sex offenders, and are often adopted by the churches and given much more hope than being in a shelter. All this time, our case managers are working to move them out of homelessness as fast as possible. I don't believe a child should ever be in homelessness. The Gathering Inn is a nonprofit organization offering a community-based response to South Placer's homeless population. With the assistance of more than 60 churches, our mission is to provide physical, mental, spiritual restoration for men, women, and children. We provide our guests with social, health, and case management services that will help them become active participants in our community. Last year, we put 160 people back into housing, which has been a congruent 32–33% of our population goes back into housing for the last 3 years. I would offer that you spend some time with my statistics, because you're going to find that, yes, we do have a population of chronically homeless, but we also would have a larger population of chronically homeless had the Gathering Inn not been available for the last 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Board. My name is C.J. Jawahar, Roseville Residence, 1568 Morning Glory Lane. There couldn't be a better day than today to talk about homelessness. I was driving up here with the heavy rain, and I couldn't stop thinking about those 540 folks out there without homes. Thank you so much, Dr. Marbut. Your report is exceptional. The takeaway message from your report today for me is those 3 key words: transformational, transitional, and the stability. We talked about economy, we talk about the viability, we talk about providing homes temporarily, but my request to the board to consider how we are going to spend any money that we are going to allocate to those agencies to transform those homeless people to a better, stable life. I read a story in Sagby about Placer County homelessness. There's one case just stuck in my mind. A technologist for more than 20 years unfortunately lost his job, was on the street. Now, to me, those three words is important when I talk about, or when I think about the technologist. Life takes us to different places. Unfortunate things happen to us, but providing a transformation. I'm not sure how much your report addressed to those criteria. For instance, building resume, helping them with a job search, networking them with all the agencies that we have. That is very key as a resident who contribute, also passionate about the homeless people to improve their life. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, or good morning, where am I? Good morning, everyone. And again, I'd like to thank the board for getting Dr. Margaret and, you know, and looking at a strategic plan. I just wanted to, as a local churchman, my name is Michael Carroll. I live up in Atwood, next to the prison. When I came here the last time, you asked about praying for rain, and it came on Friday. So we're having another meeting on the homeless, and it's raining again. So please God, you know, God hears the cry of the poor. Again, a strategic plan is needed because all the different people that are trying to help, one of my concerns is that you're going to burn a lot of us off. You know, we came in with goodwill, the right hand of Auburn. One of our members is works with Father Joe down in, and his name is Carroll as well, Joe Carroll. The family are into the rescue business. But anyway, he raises 1 million dinners a year for San Diego, and he's part of our community. He lives half the year here. We've got great people in this community, but my fear is that somehow or another we'll burn people off if we don't get some strategic plan going forward. Again, there's another strata there as well. We've got so many people in our communities and our churches raising kids that are not their kids. I'm just saying, we get so much asking for help to pay for repair of cars. Like our churches, I can honest to God tell you, the amount of work that churches have to do to keep people out of the homeless level. And then when people get into the homeless level, and I liked your comment, you know, for those that are in it, it's a terrible cross. And I would hope that during this season of Easter that, and Passover, that it would be a time of hope. So I'm asking your help, guys. I was going to retire, and I just felt I need to give this a bit of, you know, so if you kind of come along with me, I'll be leaving town soon. If you don't, you'll have this old Irish guy standing up here maybe every month, praying for rain, but praying for the homeless. Again, and I can't imagine what it has taken to get the gathering in where it is. When I came into the parish, because we have a school, we're supposed to not have the kids and homeless or, you know, the fears. So we helped at the weekends, and we can go a week or two in the summer to help. So I hope that we can all work together, politicians, us clergy. Just give you an example, and I'll just mention 3 or 4. Pat has gone into clean and sober. We have another lady that we had to get into mental health, but she is okay. Yesterday I drove 2 people up to Colfax, which I'm doing nearly every week. I'm not bringing the people here. I kind of move them on if I can, and give them $100, 200. Sometimes it's just that little bit that they need. It isn't, there's an awful lot of people, besides the homeless and the broken and the chronic, there's an awful lot of people, all they need is $100 or $200, and they can make it. But there's nobody to give them that. So I'm just saying, if we can get a strategic plan, and I'd like to continue being part of this, but I'd also like to retire. So God bless you all, okay?
It occurs to me that if perhaps we scheduled a 2-week workshop on this, we might put an end to our drought.
Yeah. Victoria Connolly, Auburn Area Homeless Forum. I also sit with Right Hand Auburn. Just a couple of points. There was a lot of talk about additional economic burdens with a program that served the homeless. I'd like to point out that there would be a concomitant reduction in costs for emergency room, law enforcement. In fact, I believe at Dr. Marbott's last community meeting, he mentioned the figure of $3,000 per emergency room stay. And here we're hearing 15 to 30 to house a homeless person a night. So that's about 100 to 200 people a night that could be helped versus one emergency room taxpayer-funded admission. And the other issue that I had a question about in the report was it said that sex offenders could not stay in Auburn Safe Harbor, a shelter, a large shelter like is being proposed, and that isn't kind of what we gleaned from our research. And I was curious, insofar as Jessica's Law has now the portion that has to do with schools and near parks, insofar as that's been struck down as an undue burden by the Supreme Court on the offenders and did not further the interests of the state. I thought maybe perhaps Dr. Marbot, being out of state, did not hear about that decision and whether or not a footnote could be put into the report to explain that. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Duran?
I did want to respond to your question about the hospital beds.
Sure.
You know, I've had a fairly high-level discussions with some of the area medical facilities and explain to them, what type of facility, at 30,000 feet could provide, food closet, could provide medical, could provide, other types of services. And these folks who are in positions of authority were very interested in having those discussions because, as you said, those beds cost, $3,000 an hour. And if there's something that we can provide that accomplishes the same mission, their insurance companies may be very interested in wanting to partner. There's also another piece to this as well, the transitional housing model. And we did this with Acres of Hope and also Town Homes, where we were able to provide the opportunity to use low-income housing credits in a specific area, and we took them from over in my district and put them up here in Ophir. And that would be also an incentive for the development community to maybe partner with us as well. There's a lot of different ways that we can skin this cat. It's just the fact that we have to do something. So I appreciate your thought.
It was Bowman.
Bowman,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
I apologize.
Good morning. Dan Appel, pastor of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Just a couple of three brief mentions. As I sat and listened today, I realized this has a potential to turn into who runs the best program. And there is something for all of us in Dr. Marbot's proposals. There's also the realization that all of us are going to have to change how we do business in order for this to work. I don't think anybody in their right mind would criticize not only the commitment and the creativity, but the accomplishments of the Gathering Inn. But I didn't hear Dr. Marbot saying it was a bad program. I heard him saying that to be a really great program, there were some changes that they could make that would improve it. The Gathering Inn takes care, in order to participate in the Gathering Inn program, you have to pretty much be dry, clean and sober in order to take part. That doesn't include most of the people that we're talking about being chronic homeless. And so there's no reason why the Gathering Inn can continue to do what they do very well and there still be a crying need for something else. And I'm concerned that we all get defensive. If I read Dr. Marbot's report, and I read it last night and this morning correctly, in order to be really successful, our program at the Adventist Church would have to undergo some significant changes as far as dovetailing in with a larger program. And it'd be easy to get defensive and say, wait a minute, no, we like what we're doing and we're not going to change. But we have to ask ourselves at some point, what's most important, the program or the people? And the same thing's true with the county. You know, you're gonna have to ask yourself if defending turf, whatever the turf might be, is most important, or if the people are most important. Driving up here today, there were several people I passed in that 38-degree rain, walking up trying to find a place to find shelter. There were a lot more that slept last night under the eaves and alcoves of our buildings because we haven't acted yet. And I hope we don't get caught in a cycle of recriminations and accusations and comparisons. In Romans, Paul says at one point, comparing themselves with themselves, they became fools. And it would be real easy for us to become very, very foolish trying to compare programs. Susie and I had the privilege of having dinner, or lunch, I guess it was the other day. And we talked about the fact that we really need to become complementary rather than competitive. And I think I can speak for all of us who are in the helping community, that's what we desperately want. But it's going to take, somebody said a little while back that one of the reasons they set the bar so high for some of the requirements for right-hand Auburn with the use of the barracks was they wanted us to have some skin in the game. I'm telling you right now, we have about as much skin as we can get in the game. What we'd like to ask is for the county to put some skin in the game. Some serious skin, because it's not ultimately our problem, it's your problem. Father, Mike, and myself, our primary role is to help people spiritually. But these are your citizens. And it's time for y'all to put some serious skin in the game. That man didn't retire, even though he desperately wanted to go back to Ireland, because he cares about the homeless in Placer County. And by the way, if you want to do a terrific commemoration one of these days, declare a Mike Connolly Day, okay? And yeah, and no, you know, seriously, you know. But folks, can all of us listening, rather than this being a chance to try to defend our turf, can we all get together, please, and solve this problem before more people die, before the problem gets worse? It's doable if we'll just work together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bridget Barnes, 3262 Penryn Road. I'll be as brief as I can. I also want to thank Dr. Marbut and the county for spending these funds to try and get a handle on the problem. The essential points, one of which was questioned by Supervisor Montgomery, is costs, so that everyone just has a handle on our preliminary operational costs. And this is 16 hours without the services that Supervisor Euler mentions and are critical, the integration that I'll come back to in just a second. We're figuring right now, our estimate is $25,000 to $26,000 a month. That's the payment to our jobber who is going to be operating at Volunteers of America, and all of the special insurance requirements that the county has. That's exclusive of the construction costs that we are having. The keys got just delivered, so construction's starting this week, thank God, and we hope to be ready by the first week of May, so that we will actually have some data when we come back and see you in August. The other point, though, that Dr. Margaret made, and you keep coming back to, Kirk, is essential. The reason I pushed for, and all of us pushed for, a location up at DeWitt was the idea that proximity, physical proximity to the existing county services was going to encourage the use, but it doesn't integrate and mandate that use as we're starting out in the process. That's why, to me, as a business person also, It would seem to me that the essentials is for a funding source that allows all of the uses, whether it's the food lockers or St. Teresa's or Seventh Day or Gathering Inn or Right Hand as a separate unit, to do the in-feed. And as this coordinated system is created, which is going to be both private business, religious, and county money, not only the data, but the overall flow is created. Because what we have to keep in mind is ours is we're very conscious of, a temporary attempt. We'll be back. We hope it'll extend for a year. But Dr. Marbott's study is talking about at least a 5-year system up in Auburn before a new building can be built, if we all agree on a location and a rezone and all of the stuff that has to go into that. And because of that, it's going to require a unique strategic placement that allows entities like Right Hand and Gathering Inn and Seventh Day and St. Teresa's and all the churches to be integrated in the system as a whole. Because that's where a major part of the funding is going to come from, but not just the funding, but I'm assuming you're expecting us all that we've stood up here and talked to you to be there to actually operate it and to provide those services. That's the only way I can see this working. So in any event, thank you very much, and I hope you will move forward in assigning a strategic plan that we can all participate in, separate and distinct from the approvals. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lisa Golden, 9755 Magellan in Loomis, and I sincerely want to thank you supervisors for taking the time to have a study made. Thank you, Dr. Marbott, and all of the agencies that have stepped forward in the years caring for our homeless, because it's truly indeed a problem. As a person who has a family member who is chronically homeless, I understand this very personally. I really appreciated your innovative thinking, Supervisor Euler, in the software. Another idea throwing out there is there a possible way to get a program developed by someone that would meet government standards and qualify for funding? Is there someone who has those skills that would donate that time? Are there buildings that are currently empty? Do it. Fairgrounds? I don't know. That maybe could be used as a stable, because I've seen the difficulty in moving, and you got to get ready, go take a shower, and where are you going to put your locker for your stuff? And it is very unstable, and it's been difficult to maintain stability for my family member. Along with mental illness, there's adult systems of care. You know, another service, I'm hearing collaboration. We have a lot of good people, smart people, caring people, and I think it is definitely important to use our funds wisely. When we're talking about demolishing a building, costing, you know, millions of dollars, could those dollars be better spent? With that said, I'm going to be praying not only for more rain, but that a good strategic plan, a successful strategic plan of collaboration with all these wonderful, smart, caring people is successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to address the board on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the board. This is not an action item, however, the board certainly has the opportunity to provide our thoughts in terms of direction, where to go from here. And so I'll start with Supervisor Montgomery, whose light is lit. If you go ahead.
Thank you. I really wanted to thank everybody who's come and shown up and weighed in on this and has been part of this long and complex process that is really just the start of a long and complex process. I think Pastor Dan's comments about getting rid of the silos and really working together is absolutely spot on, and we all have to have skin in the game. And frankly, I think everybody in this room does. What I'm seeing is there are certain partners who aren't in this room, and that concerns me. And so I think part of what we need to do, working together, the faith-based community, the business community, the county, is to really build some of those other relationships that we need to build within the larger county as a geographic region, to make sure that we can site places without a lot of NIMBYism, that we can get facilities built, that they can get funded, that we can work together collaboratively to do the tracking that we need to do, to get the outcomes that we all agree that we need to get. I think the barracks is a great start, but it's just a start, and we all recognize that. It has to go so much more beyond that, because frankly, you know, we're recreating a night-by-night process here, and we understand that that's not going to get us our best outcome. A couple of very specific things about your report and your recommendations. I really want to make sure as we move forward that we figure out a way to fund the HMIS programming for all our partners so that we can start to collaboratively track that information. But as part of that, I also want to say we need to tell people who aren't willing to help us get to that HMIS tracking, sorry, we can't give you money. We've got to focus our dollars the most effective way possible, because these are Placer County tax dollars and state dollars and federal dollars that we're spending. And it's our obligation to spend them as effectively as possible. And that's true whether it's the faith community or the business community or governments. Those are our obligations. I think the idea of figuring out where we can put a service center in Auburn and Roseville and provide services probably online, maybe focused through HHS in Eastern Placer County particularly, that is absolutely critical. We have to take the next step, which is buildings and actual physical locations where we can provide not just overnight services to people, but the services that have to go with them, because the overnight services, we all agree, are not the answer. They have to be in combination with those specific outcomes that Kirk talked about. Enabling people is not the right thing to do. Giving people the ability to improve and change their lives is something that we all have to do together as a community. I think about, the recommendation about street feeding and services need to realign themselves with treatments and existing, sort of more comprehensive approach to this. I think we're, in some respects, having the same conversation about fire districts, small fire districts, these individual pieces that have siloed and have provided really important services over the years. That model doesn't work anymore. How do we create that new model? And giving up the ego and giving up the this is my territory, critically important. And I can tell you that I'm one member of 5 on this board, but I'm willing to say it's not about the county. It's not about the city. It's not about a particular church or a particular organization. It's about all of us working together as a community to serve our family members. Because, as we just heard, these are our family members who are in chronic homelessness, and we don't want to see that number continue to increase. The case management system, that's probably something that I want to understand a little bit better and work with Jeff and understand what does that really mean? How do we get a more robust case management system? I think the HMIS piece is going to be a huge and critical part of that, because until we actually understand the various services and where and how they're being provided, I don't think there's a good way to get a grasp on larger case management, and that is something that's, again, critically important. So I'm both heartened and saddened by the information in the report. I think a lot of us are doing a lot right now, and it's very clear that we could and should and must do a lot better. And I just want to encourage us as a county to put our ego aside and work with everybody else and figure out how do we blow out those boundaries, how do we create a critical mass that supports the needs of the least among us. And so all you're asking for is direction today. That's my direction, and thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Duran.
Yeah, and I agree pretty much with everything that Supervisor Montgomery just said. I will add a couple of things that I would like to see a report or a process similar to what we did with the criminal justice policy, because there's some of these things there's recommendations that have been made that we can do that'll be very low cost, and the timeline to get them done will be, months as opposed to years. And then I would like to see, kind of like a chart that shows what we need to do before to have a little bit longer term effect, and then also the long term issues, like, for example, a 24/7 type situation. And then obviously we have to have our staff folks plug the numbers in to what these things are going to cost. And I think that in and of itself will kind of give us a natural direction based on what resources we have in order to move this process forward. And it's going to be a very difficult, it's going to be very interesting, and it's a very necessary process. And leadership calls for that. We have to make decisions. If you don't make decisions, you're not doing your job. And trying to wish these things away isn't gonna do anything. That's kind of my thought. There's gonna come a time, just like with all of these other issues that we're dealing with, fire, libraries, that we have to make decisions on these. And I fully agree with what Supervisor Montgomery said about, having, this is mine kind of mentality. When you have a diminishing resource, we have to utilize our opportunities the best that we can. I mean, the wastewater treatment plants up here in Auburn, there's a perfect example. They're 4 miles apart, but yet the state has beset us with a lot of regulations that make running those operations extremely costly. So it doesn't make sense to have 2 of them. We have to utilize our resource better, and that's kind of the mindset that I have. There's nothing personal. If this was in my district, I'd be making the same decision. But that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Supervisor Wygant.
Just focusing on trying to not be redundant, but I really haven't heard anything I guess I disagree with today. I recall comments early on when we started this process about another study to be done upon which the county did nothing. And I'm assuming that we're not going to do that, so I'm assuming we're at the beginning of actually implementation of and development of a strategic plan. So I look forward to scheduling some updates, monitoring how we're doing, focusing on Jack's comments about picking the low-hanging fruit first, but with an eye on the longer-term opportunity. And when oftentimes hits me that probably doesn't need to be said, it actually is something that does need to be said. So I just wanted to, all of the people that are actually out there that have been participating, I really appreciate the candid and open conversation we had and the work that was done. But I don't want anyone to think that that's been any kind of a criticism or should be interpreted harshly. We really need to get a better handle on all. We have kind of an anomaly problem, and there's a lot of good news here, but we have an unusual circumstance. And it looks to me to be something that could be dramatically improved upon if we all sort of think somewhat differently and tweak our operations somewhat, but not in a huge way. And it's certainly not shouldn't be construed as any kind of criticism of all of the effort and energy that's gone forward over many years by several people. Thanks.
Supervisor Holmes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a lot of good programs in place now between St. Teresa's and Seventh-day Adventists, Salvation Army, Gathering In. All of those organizations are doing good work to provide services for the homeless. But now we have a roadmap to kind of bring all that together. And I think we need to take some of this and process it and put it into practice. That's my comment.
Thank you. And the only thing that I will add is that there is a defined universe now. We much better understand the problem, and clearly our greatest ROI is going to be achieved in focusing on that particular slide that you have up there right now. And that's where I think whatever we create by virtue of an infrastructure where the county plays an integral role is addressing that particular population. It seems that those folks that are a bit more transient in and out of homelessness, unfortunately, more out than in, are being served by the various existing temporary opportunities that they're able to find, take advantage of during that temporary time of crisis, and then move on. Clearly, this population, so having identified the population, it hopefully will be easier for us, having now qualified it, to quantify it from a cost standpoint and then a deliverables standpoint. And so what I would encourage is the same expansive outreach that you engaged in putting together this report, you continue in putting together the strategy for addressing the situation, so that we continue to embrace the nonprofit sector the way that we have in putting together the report. And that I would encourage you to, at any point where you think you need direction from the board, whether it's because you've reached some kind of difference of opinion that has resulted in impasse in terms of the plan that you want to bring forward, or it's identification of a budget-related item that you don't feel that you have appropriate authority to address, at any point as you're moving this forward that you reach a stumbling block like that, schedule a board item and come on back. Because this board, I think you've heard from all five of us, has a commitment to getting something down on paper that we can begin implementing in order to address that population right there. Any questions from staff, or you would like any clarification on anything that you heard from us?
I'm going to restate what I understand, and then maybe you can clarify. I think we will go forward. There's a lot of goodwill at the table, both within the county, but also in the nonprofit community, and hopefully we can develop interest at the city level also.
Precisely.
To convene work groups around all of these recommendations, to look at developing more specifics, flush out the low-hanging fruit, come up with cost estimates, come up with schedules. And then when we have something similar to what was done with the criminal justice master plan, then we can bring that back to you for your review and for your input on how you'd like us to continue to move forward.
Yeah, and I think again, I would just as chair emphasize, do not be concerned or afraid about checking back in with the board at any time where you think you need additional direction, there might be a difference of opinion or any kind of a stumbling block that would get in your way from a budget standpoint. Come back to the board and get direction.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Supervisor Montgomery?
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on Chairman Euler's comments on that. And even between coming back and talking to us at the board officially as a public body in a public meeting, feel free to touch in with all five of us during the process, just to make sure that you're still kind of on board with what we thought we meant and what you thought we meant, because it can be a little bit confusing in these particular conversations. I've already had a really good suggestion submitted to me that I'll be following up on with you directly. Thank you, Pastor Dan. And I think there are some really low-hanging fruits that we can move on very quickly, even in advance of maybe having a sort of comprehensive strategic plan, particular things specific to the recommendations that Dr. Marbut made that we can move forward with really quickly. And I think that's going to be really showing our intent, is making sure that the rubber really does hit the road here. So, thank you.
All right. Seeing no other comments from board members, thank you very much for the presentation. Dr. Marbut, thank you for your report. And I want to thank the members of the audience who participated in this conversation for your participation.